Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 31st of August. It's the 23rd day of the Hebrew month of Elul. And
Right.
here's something that you may not know, but it is actually on the Hebrew calendar, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. As we know, there's a Jewish calendar and
Yeah.
a secular calendar, and so they don't always align. And so 20 years ago today on the Hebrew date, it was 9/11. And so
I actually got married on that day. Well, 9/11, but it
Right.
was in 67.
I was actually there when it happened. So it's a very big
Oh,
traumatic
So-
anniversary
so-
for me. So, and I was in the building a week before it went
Wow.
down in an area
All
where
I-
we would have been dead. We couldn't get out. I mean,
Wow.
if it
Who
were a
is
week
speaking?
earlier. So
Who is speaking
That's
that was there?
Shira.
Shira.
I was
Shira.
there. So it's very, I was in the 110th floor of the North Tower a week before,
Oh.
exactly. And then
Wow.
a week later we were in Brooklyn. So it was not on a TV. That's all I'll say.
Wow.
It was not on a TV.
And I have a friend's
Real life.
daughter-in-law who was on the 80th floor in the South Tower. And they told them not to go down, but she didn't listen. And
Oh.
she walked down 80 floors and
Wow.
got out. Thank
Wow.
God.
Wow.
All right, so what I was saying was that because on the Jewish calendar, it's that day, so it's also the yard site. It's the date of passing of those who perished in the
Right.
World Trade Center,
Mhm.
according to the Jewish tradition. So why don't we dedicate today's studying, to honor the memory of all those that perished in that terrible attack, and in a prayer for peace, stability, and security for all, and certainly for America and for our community. And we'll leave it at that. As you know, we like to keep our lessons abstract and untethered to current events, especially when they are controversial or disappointing or
Mhm.
there's disagreement. So why don't we just leave it at a general prayer for peace, stability, and well-being for everyone.
but it shows you at this
Hold on,
time.
no,
But it shows at this time. I went on. I was really happy, and I'm going to look forward to hearing the show for yours on Monday. But yesterday at the South Beach Park Temple, Beth Torah had our two rabbis were there,
beautiful.
but one rabbi spoke, the other one blew the shofar beautifully. But they came with two security men. So that
Wow.
shows you how times have changed. They walked around before he arrived. I actually came with them, but it seemed like they were before walking around. And it became essential, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Uh,
But we're gonna try to
necessary.
we're gonna focus today on our optimism and our hope and wishes. But of course,
Yes,
that
of
doesn't take
course.
away from the
But
need
what
to
has
be
to be-
sensible and responsible.
Right, exactly.
And so let's talk about some geopolitical strife and turmoil, but not today, not in today's headlines, but 2,400 or so years ago. Let's talk about the geopolitical mess, as well as the internal mess that existed in the land of Israel. And so we're going to share the screen. And I just want to remind you, as I find my screen, which that is not what I want to share there, that we have begun a new book of the Bible known as the Book of Judges. And we read a lengthy introduction last week. And it told us to anticipate a reoccurring pattern of the Jewish people going a little nutty, abandoning their values, abandoning their Mosaic law and the instruction of Moses and Joshua, living a life that was depraved and counter to the values of the Torah, idolatrous practice, and worse, trouble, oppression, and then a leader, a person to rise, help the Jewish people gather and organize, both on a spiritual dimension as well as on a military way, to help the Jewish people push back against their oppressors, to regain freedom and protection. And this is a reoccurring pattern that we're going to keep on reading about. And last week we had our very first sample, though not so much drama involved. And it was the story of Othniel, son of Kenaz, Othniel the Kenizite, who helped deliver the Jewish people from King Kushan Rishathaim of the kingdom of Aram Naharaim. And he oppressed the Israelites for 8 years. Then Othniel gathers the people, they inspire them spiritually, and they defended and pushed back against their oppressors. And the land had peace for 40 years. That was the story we read about last week. Not a lot of details, but just getting our feet wet and introducing us to this fluid, dynamic, and somewhat troublesome situation. And now we're going to begin our next adventure, our next tale. In the book of Judges, it's going to be familiar. And as they say, although history does not repeat itself, history sure does rhyme. And that is true in the Bible, where it repeats reoccurring themes. And of course, we might find that to be true about how our world seems to organize itself and how certain places, as much as things change, they seem to not change at all. We'll leave it at that, and we'll take a look at the next tale of the Bible, of the book of Judges. Someone at the door, come on in. Maybe I'm hearing things, I don't know. The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord. And because they did what was offensive to the Lord let King Eglon of Moab prevail over Israel. So as you might recall, we talked about a variety of neighbors who caused trouble for the Israelites across its borders. And now we're talking about the Moabite king. Where was Moab relative to Israel? So Moab was on the east, to the east of Israel, and I believe to the it's to the east and to the south. So if we had to, and don't worry, we're not going to do a lot of geography here, but just let's get a little bit of a sense of what's going on the map. Pardon me. Let's take a look. Maps. Again, don't be traumatized. Don't get any PTSD. We're just looking very briefly at the map. I know we spent a lot of time on the map previously. So here we go. We're zooming in. There's Israel. This is Jordan. This is what we call the West Bank. This is what might be understood as the East Bank. In other words, this region, and it gets a little wider, but broadly speaking, this would have been what we call the territory of Reuben, Gad, and the half of Shevet Menashe. It's a little bit larger than I'm portraying, but I just wanted to give you a sense. Well, south, maybe something like here, this would have been the land of Moab. And so we're talking about the region just to the east of Israel and just to the south of those folks on the east side of the Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Close neighbors, and in the position to cause a lot of source, to cause a lot of hardship for the Israelite people. And so he does. King Eglon, king of Moab, prevails over Israel. So we know in those days many times, even if an entire kingdom isn't vanquished, even if they aren't entirely defeated, they might be subjected to oppression, to oppressive taxes, levies, and other kinds of oppressive raids. And so Eglon was not just an enemy king, but he actually creates a confederacy of those who hate Israel. And he finds Ammonites and Amalekites under his command, and they went and defeated Israel, and they occupied a city called Ir Timarim, the city of date palms. You know which city we're talking about? This is a very devastating blow, because the city of date palms, according to commentaries, is understood to be Jericho. Jericho is an important city for the Jewish people. That was the site of their first military victory.
Right.
And so it's not just an important city, it was a symbol of Jewish victory. And to lose that to the enemy must have been very devastating, very demoralizing, and more so, let's just look for Jericho briefly on the map.
And who was in Jericho? What do we remember? Well, what tribes were in there? Were assigned that land?
I believe it might have been Judah.
Okay.
And Joseph tribe, maybe Joseph tribes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's in that region. So again, I don't know if you see the map, but I know but here's Jericho.
Yeah.
And so Jericho is right at the first spot. It's close to the Israel center. And to have the city of Jericho fall would have been emotionally devastating. because of the symbolism. Now, why wasn't it called Jericho? Why was it called the city of Tamarim dates? And so the commentaries in the Bible make a very interesting point. You might recall that God tells the Israelites to never reconstruct, to never rebuild the city of Jericho. And so how do they rebuild the city of Jericho? And so the commentators say most likely what happened is the Jews built another settlement right adjacent to Jericho. That was a Jewish town. It reminded them of the victory that they had in Jericho without breaching God's instruction to not rebuild the city of Jericho. But nonetheless, an emotionally painful and devastating blow to the Jewish pride, to the Jewish national pride, and to their confidence. And the Israelites were subject to King Eglon of Moab for 18 years. And so for 18 years, they were under under Moabite King Eglon rule. So let's see what happens next. Finally, the Israelites start saying, hey, maybe there's something spiritual we could be doing. And so they start praying to God. They cried out to God, and the Lord raised up a champion for them. Remember, translations don't always capture the full nuance of the language, or sometimes the translation can be frozen in a certain time or perspective. But ultimately, a redeemer, a champion, a military man who's going to protect, defend, and restore balance. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, which, as we mentioned, the city of Jericho in that region would have been just on the border of Benjamin and Judah. Here's an interesting fact about this guy, Ehud. Well, first of all, anyone know a name Ehud? Famous Israeli statesman, general, prime minister, Ehud Barak.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And now you know probably the earliest use of that name Ehud. It's biblical. And so
How do you
Ehud,
spell it, Rabbi?
here they spell it E-H-U-D. And this is chapter 3 of Judges.
E-H-U-E?
D, like David. Ehud or
Yeah.
Ehud.
Oh, D.
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 And this is
Okay.
chapter 3, verse 15. The next champion, the next judge, the person who's going to help restore balance, security, and national pride, spiritual presence, Ehud, son of Gera. Something unique about him is he was a left-handed man. Now, it's not really that unique, but we know in ancient society, left-handedness was a little unpopular. If our Russian friends, we have a few folks that join us, wonderful young men originally from the former Soviet Union, they would tell us that in Russia, if you displayed indications of being right-handed, you were forced to nonetheless use your right hand, and they were trained to override in as much as one can and become trained to use their right hand.
Right.
Not something that is comfortable or part of the American culture, but just to understand how once upon a time it might have been rare to be left-handed. So why do we tell us that he was left-handed? Is it an insult? Is it a praise? The answer is that it is neither. But it's going to become essential to a later point in the story. And so for that reason, the Bible tells us now that he was a left-handed person, because it ends up being a miracle. He was born that way, and it allows him to be victorious in an important circumstance. So anyways, he was left-handed, and it happened that the Israelites sent tribute to King Eglon of Moab through him. And as we know, as I mentioned, when a kingdom was under the jurisdiction and the authority of another king, they would have to send tribute. And so this guy, Ehud, son of Gera, a Benjaminite, becomes the courier or the head of a delegation to present tribute to the king of Eglon. But Ehud had more intrigue. He had other plans up his sleeve. And here it goes. Verse 16. So Ehud made for himself a two-edged dagger. Now, I think today we imagine many fighting implements, knives would have blades on both ends, but maybe that wasn't always the case. At a time where metal was hard to manipulate, perhaps their swords would only be sharp on one side, kind of like our kitchen knives, right? Our kitchen knives are mostly only sharp on one side.
Mhm.
You imagine a sword would be sharp on both sides. And so here he devises for himself a special customized dagger. Be sharp on both sides, two-edged, double-edged. And it was a gomed in length. What is a gomed? It's a kind of measurement. How much is that? So let's take a look if the commentaries tell us what a gomed is. It's a little smaller than an amma, which is typically a considered 1.5 feet, I believe. So it was like a German Daumen lang, gomed, certain measurement. Not quite the full length of not a full, how do you call it? Not a full cubit. It's close to a meter. It was smaller than that, which he girded on his right side under his cloak. And he places this knife on his right side under his cloak. So he takes a knife with him. Now, excuse me. Apparently, typically, a right-handed person would draw their knife or sword from their left side in combat. I don't know, but I suspect that with firearms, people would draw from the side of their hand. So I suspect that with a firearm, a person might draw from the very, but you know what? I don't know. I don't have much or any experience with firearms, but at the very least, apparently a dagger was drawn from the opposite side of your hand. Because think about it, you have more access to the left side of you have more immediate access to the left side of your person than your right hand, where it's a little more awkward, especially if you're in a relaxed pose. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So he has, I'll tell you more. Again, with the caveat or with the disclaimer, I don't know much about guns, but I've seen police or undercover folks sometimes carry a firearm in their jacket or on a sling, and I believe then it would always be on the opposite side of their primary hand. So anyways, he has a dagger which is a little less than the average size, and it's on his right hand under the cloak. He presented the tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Now Eglon was a very stout man. He was a big man. When you see something funny, the Hebrew words for being a little overweight is ish bari me'od. He was very healthy. Now, the interesting thing is that in present society, we don't associate heaviness, being overweight. Again, this is not a judgment or a discrimination, but we don't usually have a correlation between the person's weight and their health, at least not in that way. But in those days, most people were probably malnourished. Most people didn't have much. And so a person that was able to provide for themselves and had sufficient calories based on their need to the point where they're able to be not entirely skinny might have been considered a sign of health and being robust.
He was well fed.
He was well fed. I think today we might use a euphemism of being robust.
Yeah.
Well, here they called him an ish barimo, very robust, very stout. And so he moved a little slower, it would seem, than the average person. By the way, I have another version of the book of the Bible here, just for I like to have another translation. And so they here say that he was a very obese man. So they don't couch it, they don't sugarcoat it. He was a heavy person. When Ehud finished presenting the tribute, he asked all of his delegation to go out, to go on. And then he returned and he tells the king, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you."
Oh.
And everyone else will be like, I gotta tell you something. So Eglon tells him silence and asks everybody to leave his presence so they can have a private conversation. In Israelite statesman, this oppressing King Eglon, when Ehud approached him, he was sitting alone in his cool upper chamber. He had the AC blowing. Trying to understand a little more about this weather control. I don't know. That's interesting. Well, anyways, they had a way to make the room a little cooler. Ehud tells him, "I have a message for you from God." And when the king heard this is an oppressing king, a king who hates the Jews. He's beating them up. But he did something that's very admirable. He's talking to his enemy. He's a person that is overweight and it's hard for him to just get up. But when the Ehud tells him, "I have a message from God," he took that seriously. Whereupon he rose from his seat, and this king made the effort to stand, to rise. When that happened, reaching with his left hand, Ehud drew the dagger from his right side and drove it into Eglon's belly. The fat closed over the blade, and the hilt went in after the blade, for he did not pull the dagger out of his belly. I skipped a few words over here. Suffice it to say, it was an unpleasant event.
But wasn't he afraid that somebody would come in and
He probably
kill
was.
him?
He probably was afraid. As much as we can't stomach taking of a life, we have to understand that this was an act of extreme sacrifice to defend the Jewish people against an oppressor.
Right, but I can't believe this king would be alone and not.
Oh, you're saying how could the king be silly enough to
How
allow
could
himself?
he be alone?
So I think part of the story is they searched him for a knife. They searched his person and they didn't come up with anything, because people then were very regularly right-handed. And so they only searched the zone where a right-handed person would draw a weapon.
I see.
And so he manages to hide the weapon in an uncommon space. And that's now why we talked about him being right-handed, left-handed. Because had he been right-handed, he would have not been able to smuggle in that knife. Being left-handed, it allowed him to smuggle in the knife, and therefore to rid the Jewish people of I don't want to say this, but a Hitler-like person, an oppressor, a murderer of their people. And he manages to end this evil person, this wicked king, his life. And so then he steps out of the vestibules. Ehud shut the door of the upper chamber, and then he locked them. So he locks the door. And after he left, and all the servants returned, when they saw the door of the upper chamber was locked, they said, he's probably relieving himself. And so they didn't want to disturb the king while he was doing his business. They waited a long time. When he didn't open the doors of the chamber, they took the key, they opened them, and that's where they saw their master was lying dead on the floor. But in the interim, being that the door was locked, Ehud made good his escape. While they delayed, he passed Silim, escaped to Sira. And so this Ehud manages to rid the Jewish people of a terrible, terrible enemy. When he gets back to his land, he had the ram's horn sounded throughout the hill country of Ephraim. He assembles all of the people of the tribe of Ephraim, and all the Israelites descended with him from the hill country. He took their lead, and he told them, "Follow me closely, for the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands." They followed him down. They seized the fords of Jordan against the Moabites. They let no one cross. So now, king of Moab's dead. His people are demoralized. So he took the moment, he seized the momentum, and they took the offensive. On that occasion, they slew 10,000 Moabite warriors. They were all brave men, but none of them escaped. And finally, on that day, the equilibrium was restored, and now Moab submitted to Israel, and the land was tranquil for 80 years.
Wow.
So the Moabites did not bother the Jewish people now for 80 years. As we know, you had all these different nations, and they were always vying for influence and for authority. And with this act of sacrifice, they were able to seize the moment and restore Jewish determination, Jewish independence of the Moabites. Now, Ehud was an important person. He saved the Jewish people just when they needed it. 18 years of slavery, 18 years of murder, of oppression, of abuse. And at long last, hold on a second. They get their independence from Moab.
Mm-hmm.
After him came another person called Shamgar, son of Anath. And he, I don't like the word slew because that makes it sound like he murdered them. In battle, they took on 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he was another champion of Israel. So there were other military geniuses, other superheroes who helped the Jewish people defend against oppressive forces. Now realize Israel didn't have just one oppressing neighbor. It wasn't just the Moabites. There was a whole bunch of different groups, all that sought trouble. But many times There was the primary oppressor, there was the primary enemy, and for that, Ehud helps the Jewish people. And then there was the Shamgar who assisted in protecting the Jewish people from, or the Israelites from the Philistines, another neighboring tribe who also oppressed the Jewish people.
But didn't they encounter the Philistines before?
Mm-hmm. They encountered the Philistines before, and they see them again. In
Okay.
short, unfortunately, it wasn't a short story.
Mm-hmm.
There was to exist in a region that's turbulent, it's not like it's one and done.
I see.
So they have to constantly be vigilant, kind of like the modern state of
Think
Israel,
that now, right?
where Israel's followed by people that hate their guts, and Israel thankfully has very valiant young men and women who defend Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and many miracles and clever intelligence and God's blessing, and they frequently have to fight to survive. Certainly in the earliest half of the state of Israel, there was a lot of that. But even though Israel was victorious in one campaign, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that the enemy is vanquished. It means that they have some time to breathe. But Israel is constantly vigilant, constantly on its feet. And I don't know if you saw the headlines, but Naftali Bennett was in Washington. And I heard that as soon as he came back from Washington, the first thing that Israel did is they added additional people and more resources to try to confront Iran. Because apparently Iran is a present threat and they don't like Israel and they desire nothing. And so the point is, Israel needs to constantly be on its tippy toes. And
Right.
from a faith perspective, we want to always make sure that we're seeking God's good graces and blessings. And so I would say the events in the Bible are not all that different from the events that we have today. And security and the victory today is good for today, but you have to constantly be innovating and constantly proactively planning for the next threat. And thankfully, that's what Israel, is constantly engaged in. And so that concludes chapter 4. I just want to add a comment here.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently this Shamgar, you see, Ehud gets a whole chapter. Shamgar gets one verse. Because Shamgar apparently he was a big warrior, but he actually is only in business for a few months. And in his brief reign, he's a big warrior, but somehow he doesn't have a long career, tragically. And so therefore he's only an asterisk. It seems like it's possible that he was already a deputy of Ehud. When Ehud passes, he's already an old man, but his career extends a few months past Ehud, so he gets his own honorable mention.
Okay.
And he was a real warrior, but he doesn't have the same independent career because, for the most part, he is a part of the story of Ehud.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the commentaries tell us.
Okay.
All right, any comments or thoughts before we go on to the next chapter?
I can tell you about the importance in the early years of Israel, when my husband served in the IDF, in the army, the importance of having soldiers who are left-handed. My husband was a tank technician in the 67 war, and he worked on Sherman tanks. But the problem was the soldiers, most of their fighting was in the desert, and their tanks were there and they practiced and everything. And my husband slept like a lot of the other soldiers. They slept in a tent with a two-man tent. But the reason why it's important that he was left-handed was the Sherman tanks, when they wanted to move them, it would be like 2 a.m. and they couldn't start the tanks. The only way they could start the tanks until they improved them over the years was to have somebody who was left-handed. And so they would wake my husband up. He was the only left-handed person they knew of that was nearby, and he would get up, 2 a.m. or whenever it was needed, just to go to the tank. You needed somebody who had a sledgehammer in order to ignite the tank, and you had to be left-handed. You could not have a right person. They
Wow.
couldn't stop the tank. So it was very important to have left-handed men, and a kind of an irony of the stories that I hear, but that is the importance. That you need a
Incredible.
left-handed guy if you want to start a Sherman tank.
You hear that? So some of the
Many of
greatest,
them.
Yeah.
some of the greatest Jewish heroes from the beginning of the Bible till the modern day were left-handed. You see that?
I guess so.
We
He was-
needed Ehud and we needed Zalman. That's beautiful.
Yeah, he was.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You see, we don't even know the heroes among us. And well, let's say l'chaim, let's toast to Zalman's neshama, his memory,
Thank you.
and for what he meant for Israel and for our people. That's beautiful. Thank you for
It is.
sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, let's start the next story, but we're going to probably stop in the middle, maybe just a few minutes earlier than usual. We're in the high pressure Rosh Hashanah zone. The Israelites, so Ehud came. I'm just hearing my voice. Joy, if I hit mute, will you
There's
be
an
able to
echo
unmute
in-
yourself? Because I hear an echo.
Right.
What
So
did you say?
There's
If I mute
definitely an
you-
echo.
If I mute
If you
will
mute,
can you unmute if you have a question?
no, I can't on my phone.
Because
No,
we
I
hear-
can't.
Because for some reason your phone is creating an echo.
I see. But if you want to mute me, that's all right.
Well, I love hearing your
Just
voice.
remember to spell the names of the heroes.
Okay. Well, let's see. Is it better now? No, I still.
No, it's fine. I can still hear you.
All right, so I'm going to hit mute just to see if that resolves the echo issue.
Okay.
I'll try to unmute you once if that's not the solution. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Joy.
Sure.
All right, testing. All right, Joy. I believe the echo is coming from your phone, but I hope you're there, and we'll try to spell it, and we'll All right, let's go forward. So the Israelites, now that they had salvation, but they went back once Ehud was gone, and here's what I understand: these saviors, these heroes, didn't just bail the Jewish people out. It was like a reminder that God has their back, and it pays to be in His corner, if you will. And so, in the lifetime of these heroes, the Israelites were would shape up, but then in their absence, they would forget about that message. So the Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, because Ehud is now no more, and the Lord surrendered them to another king. So if you'll notice, each oppressor is a different kingdom, a different place on the map, equally problematic. Now the oppressor is King Yavin, or in English, Jabin, Jabin, like Nancy, King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in the city of Chatzor, or Hazor, Hazor. And so now the Jewish people are being oppressed by King Yabin of Canaan. And actually Hazor is a city that was meant to be given to the Israelites, but the Israelites were unwilling to take that on, if you remember in the book of Joshua. And so there's this pocket of Canaanite oppression in the homeland. And his army commander was called Sisera, whose base was Charoshet Goyim. Sisera, General Sisera, here spelled Sisera. Sisera. By the way, the name Sisera reappears because apparently it was a name that was prevalent for the mighty generals of different kingdoms. So now we have this king who's oppressing the Jewish people. And the Israelites really cried out to the Lord. He was a scary guy. He had 900 iron chariots. He had a major army, major technology, and he had oppressed Israel ruthlessly for 20 years. So for 20 years, King Jabin oppresses the Jewish people. Now, my dear friends, is a plot twist I'm not sure if you were expecting, but you'll be glad you're here for it.
But Rabbi, this
Yes.
was supposed to be the promised land.
Correct.
This wasn't supposed to be,
The
once
Middle
they
East.
got there, to have all these tumultuous, for the Jews to
Hold
be.
on, one second. Give me a second. I just need it. We can't hear you. Something happened with my
Can you
sound.
hear me?
Try again.
Okay. The
No.
land of Israel was supposed to be the Jews were supposed to be free from oppression. Okay,
Hold
when
on.
they went to the
I'm
promised
pushing.
land. Can you hear me?
Lynn?
Yeah?
Okay, I'm sorry. I was trying
Can
to
you hear me
troubleshoot.
now?
I hear you. I hear you now. I was trying to troubleshoot the sound. Give me one more second. Let's
Is
see.
it the feedback? I'll mute myself again.
No. You're good. You're good. Lynn, Joy, I'm glad you
Okay.
heard
So,
your
did
voice.
you hear what I said, Rabbi?
I only heard part of what you said, but let me see if I got it right. You were saying, hey, the Israelites just went to the promised land. Why
Right.
do they have to have so much surus?
Why are they oppressed when they were free,
Ah,
when they were oppressed in Egypt, and then they went to the promised land so that they would not be oppressed, and now suddenly they're oppressed again?
New generation.
so yeah, this is many generations forward, but the oppression was to save.
It's, you hear the echo again.
Yeah.
All right, Joy, I'm gonna hit mute, but you'll unmute yourself to comment because you did this time.
So,
Basically, Israel is unique at the point of the Bible where it is a free promised land, but
yes,
it comes with conditions. You've got the AC, but if you don't turn it on, it's not going to work. And so in Israel, you'll be hot. The land of Israel was a glorious place, but there were some conditions. The conditions were live according to the guide that was presented with
okay,
follow the manual for Israel. And so the thesis of the Bible is, the story is, that it was generally a peaceful place when the
Mhm.
Jewish people embraced paganism and
and they
murdering
didn't
their children.
follow, so that's why they, okay,
So
right.
there's a direct correlation between
right.
them
Mhm.
making trouble and having trouble.
Yes,
Then when they try to straighten things out, that's when these redeeming savior superhero folks arise. But here's for the plot
Right.
twist that you've all been waiting for. Who do you think is going to be the person to save the people of Israel from the 900 iron chariots and the vast armies of King Jabin of Canaan? Are you ready? We're about to meet this special superhero. Would you like to meet him? Here we go. Deborah, wife of Lapidot, was a prophetess.
Mhm.
He led Israel at that time. Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, Deborah is the wife of Lapidot. She was a prophetess and she led Israel at that time. She had her favorite spot where she would hang out, where she would sit and lead. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah. There was a special palm tree, a special space on a hill probably, that was well situated between the two main cities of the region, so people could come and consult with her. Between Ramah, the city of Ramah, and Bethel, in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. And so she's sitting on her perch where people knew they could find her if they needed her. And now Israel is being oppressed. So what are the Jewish people going to do? So she, as the leader, selects and picks a general who's going to lead the Jewish people in this next military excursion. She summoned Barak.
Barak, Flash.
Barak, do we know a Barak?
Yeah,
We've got a Barak, part of our Parsha
Yeah.
discussion community. We have a very popular young boy, not so
Yeah.
young, an adolescent, called Barak Wallach.
yeah.
And God willing, whenever we get back to being in person outside, I hope he'll join us again.
I can't wait for Barak to come back. To come to Bible study.
Oh, yes. So who was the first Barak? Where do we get the name Barak? Not from a more contemporary American leader called Barak, but from the biblical Barak, son of Abinoam of Kedesh in Naphtali. And so this is going to be a dynamic duo. Deborah, the judge, the prophetess, and Barak, the general. Deborah is from Ephraim, apparently. Barak is from the tribe of Naphtali. And she tells him, hey, Barak, the Lord, the God of Israel commanded, go, march up to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali tribe and Zebulun. And you're going to take on the oppressive general Sisera. And I will draw Sisera, Jabin's army commander, with his chariots and his troops towards you in the river bank of Kishon, and I'll deliver him to your hands.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, please.
Now, in those days, I mean, this was a woman. This is the first time we're hearing about well, it's not the first time we're hearing about a heroine of a woman, but we haven't heard in a long time about a heroine that was a woman.
Yep.
Moses' sister.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess it was fine, right?
Yeah.
That they listened to a woman, correct?
Yeah. Listen, we had Golda Meir was the prime minister of Israel. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I know Joy can affirm for this, we have really qualified, talented women, but for some reason they have to prove themselves more than men. Things are changing, but the change is slow and it's slow. So, but let's learn a little bit more about Deborah. I do have to go in like 3 minutes.
Right.
I just want to see a little more about. So let's see about the relationship between this Barak, the general, and Deborah, the spiritual prophetess and leader. So God tells Deborah the Jews need to take on this king. She tells the general where to go. Well, he wasn't the general. She appoints him to be the general. And Barak says, hang on. If you go with me, I'll go. I need you at my side. If not, I will not go. Barak's afraid to go by himself. He wants to have the prophetess. He wants Deborah alongside him.
Aye.
So she says, very well, I'll go with you into battle. But know something. You're making me the shugga, you're going to pay a price. There will be no glory for you in the course you are taking. For then the Lord will deliver Sisera, not into your hands, but the great general is going to be delivered into the hand of another woman. And so Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh.
She's a tough woman.
She's a tough negotiator, and you'll see what happens. So Barak then gathers the army from the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, 10,000 men. They march with him, and Deborah goes alongside him. Now, we're about to meet another long-forgotten character of the Bible, but an important geopolitical component of the region. Now, Hever the Canaanite had separated from the other Canaanites, descendant of Hobab, father-in-law of Moses. So we're talking about a descendant of Moshe's father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
So they're essentially distant cousins of Moshe's children.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived somewhere in the region, and they'd actually moved to be closer to the Jewish people. And so they pitched their tent at Elon B'Tzananim. You ready for this? I'm going to spell it out, Joy, but they don't have to write it down. Bezaan, Bazan, Annim, Bazananim, which is near Kadesh. And so you have on the border of the Israelites, you have this other tribe, an allied clan of folks that are relatives to Moshe's family through his wife, related to Jethro, Yisro. And Sisera was informed. He finds out that the Jews are ready for an offensive. So that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera, to prove his force, orders all of his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had with him to move from their present location in a space called Haroshet Goyim, as we mentioned, to go meet up with the Jews in the dried up riverbank of Wadi Kishon. So now Deborah tells Barak, up, get up, go on. This is the day the Lord will deliver Sisera into your hands. The Lord is marching before you. Sounds familiar, right? This is what Moshe tells the Jewish people. God is going with you. And so Barak riles up his crowd. He organizes them, he gathers them, and they charge down Mount Tabor to take on the general Sisera. They're coming from the high ground, which gives them a strategic advantage. So you see what happens? Barak takes all his team, and they're on the mountain. Sisera wants to take them on, and now they can charge down the mountain with some momentum on their side. But here's the deal. 10,000 men versus how many chariots did we say it was?
900 something.
900 chariots. I want to remind you something. 900 chariots isn't 900 warriors. That's like 900 tanks in addition to infantry. So we're talking about a very large, well armed force.
Mm-hmm.
And so they charge down, and here's where the God component, here's where the Jewish super how do you call it? Their secret weapon is deployed. And the Lord, God, Hashem, threw Sisera and all of the chariots and the army into a panic before the onslaught of Barak. And as we know, the worst thing to happen for an army is for them to panic,
Lose their
because
mind.
an army is trained and there
Right.
are strategy and ways to hold your ground and ways to protect yourself. And warriors are meant to work collaboratively
Follow the leader.
and follow the leader and follow instructions.
Mhm.
When panic ensues, everything falls apart.
Right.
Before long, Sisera leaps from his chariot and fled on foot. And we have to stop right here. So let's just recap where we're up to. The Jewish people have an oppressive king, a Canaanite king. He's causing them tsuris until Deborah, the judge, prophetess, rallies the Jewish people, appoints a military leader in
Mhm.
Barak. She tells him to go recruit an army, to go up to the mountain. And when they're finally confronted, they take on this army. They charge down the mountain. And although in pure military equations, the Canaanite king should have been victorious, God throws them into a frenzy, into a panic. They lose formation. They start to run. And next time we join, we're going to read the part 2 of the story, which is the downfall of the general Sisera in the hands of yet another woman. Her name is Yael, and we're going to meet her next time we meet. But
Okay, Rabbi, I have to ask a question. I'm
can I
sorry.
just say one thing and then you'll ask the question?
Yes, yes.
But unfortunately, or fortunately, next week
Right.
is Rosh Hashanah.
So you're not teaching.
So
Okay.
Tuesday, Rosh Hashanah, we're not going to have a class.
Mhm.
But God willing, we'll be in touch via the WhatsApp group, and we'll be in touch for the next class. And we got to do one more thing. It's a week till Rosh Hashanah, and so we like to, in preparation, to sound the shofar. Now, those that are able to should really try. It's not easy with COVID and everything.
Okay.
Hear the shofar in person, but let this be a little warm up. And I need a warm up because it's been a
Go
while.
ahead. Go ahead.
I'm gonna, yeah, you can stand. I'm gonna do it sitting so they can see me.
Very good.
There we
Very
go.
good.
Very
Very good.
good.
Happy and a healthy, sweet New Year.
Right.
Yes.
Is it coming?
Okay.
So wherever you are, if you're able to hear the shofar, for those that are local,